So I guess we should share a couple of thoughts. First of all, we had just wrapped up a one-day Alaska Language Summit here in Juneau. We had Unungach, Yupik, Nupiaq, Gwich'in, Atna, Koyukon, Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian. That was it, right? 9. We had Hawaiian and Mohawk as some presenters. You guys were there. You want to share anything briefly about the Language Summit?
I thought it was really cool, the mission statements talk about steering away from being like culturally diverse and like physically having to produce language speakers in there. I thought that was cool.
Yes.
And like very direct, like, and with language comes culture and these different assets and things to.
So there's a linguist named Sonoda who I was reading about, and he notes the difference between culture and language. And so, I think as language learners and advocates and planners and teachers, it's important to understand this difference. Not to say anybody's better than anybody else, because people get offended at thoughts like this. But you can have, so language and culture are totally intertwined. But you can teach the language without the culture, which would be developing a school. It's way too academic. All you're doing is just translating 100% of Eurocentric content. And that could be, and so you can have speakers who don't know how to do things culturally. It's very possible. And then you can also have culture where people can sing and dance and carve and cook fish and cut fish and do all these different things and hunt without knowing how to speak the language. And so getting the second one is much more common than getting the first one. And so it's much easier to learn, and it's hard. It takes dedication, it takes courage to get up in front of people, but it's much more difficult to learn the language than it is to learn how to perform and singing and dancing. And it's not just with Tlingit, it's all over the place. And it's also, you can very easily start out with having a plan to do language stuff and shift into cultural stuff. Or the things for me is shifting into the academic stuff. So you're just talking about grammar and structure all day, and you're not talking through the language about different sorts of content. So yeah, we were looking at mission statements of a variety of different language programs and things that do language, and none of them actually contain the words create new speakers, right? That's just got to be what our primary goal is, those of us who are studying Tlingit, is to become speakers ourselves, and then to take those skills we've developed and make other speakers. And so that's one of the keys, I think, to revitalizing languages. Other thoughts? Or any thoughts on that?
It was interesting to be on the side. Like I feel like I've reached the point with my studying of Tlingit where I can understand a good bit of like what people are talking about. Mm-hmm. But it was really cool to hear all those other languages and be like, I have no idea what you're saying.
Right.
But I would love to know.
Right. Yeah. It was, when I listen to Hawaiian, I can catch some words here and there. But most of the other languages,
or like just how different, Yeah, I mean, like learning all the thank yous. Mm-hmm. I think I want to do that really bad now. But just hearing how different they are. Or like even, like some of, the similar sounds to, right. A lot of the languages that were there have very close sounds, Yeah, it's just interesting, the similarities and differences.
Oh, yeah, that. Asaya kudzitiga atna. Wasa tu wasak. Yo with ka aya khatakheus. Akhasaku qunana chakhasaku. Is there a different one? Okay, that's what I figured.
Putting na or atna.
Atna, what we would call them atna.
I don't know. I always heard it atna, but that's because there were atna speakers here not even too long ago. So
Right.
Yeah.
They got a word for us. Like he said he didn't know what it translated to.
I don't think I've heard it. What is it?
Ja, achshinach kuk atunach aka achtatnach duch atudach. But yeah, I'll ask him sometime. Yeah, so we had advocates from all over the place talking about language revitalization programs. And so some of the things that we got to consider as we're continuing to learn the language, one is how do we continue to use the language a bunch? And then the other thing is how do we get it into our homes, get it into our communities, and get it into our schools? And in other cases, build our own schools that are full immersion schools. And so those were some of the things that we were really talking about. Another sort of idea was trying to have a central like warehouse, I guess we call it, where there's a bunch of language revitalization materials. Here's a step-by-step process for doing this. Here's a step-by-step process for doing that. And then here's how you can do assessments of where your speakers are at. And because people were sharing a lot of different stuff with us, from full immersion schools and daycares to adult immersion programs. And then there was a wide variety of other topics. And then one of the other things I was thinking of was an Alaska Native language media group. I can't remember, I had some name for it, but it would be sort of a consortium where we're pooling our efforts and our resources and our know-how, and we're learning how to make more videos and audio and stuff so we can have Tlingit radio and Tlingit TV. And it doesn't have to be this station that's always on. It could be online, but we could be negotiating. We could be trying to launch some station, RatNet they used to call it, used to, exist, and maybe it still does. I think they did away with the rabbit ear things. Those have gone in the past, but there may be other ways. And then how do we get this content into other communities that have data limits or slow internet to make sure that we're making these things accessible? And so we might have to be creative. That's the latest updates. Anything else?
I thought it was cool when they talked about, or it was in the breakout session with, I forget the Mohawk guy's name. Jeremy.
Deho.
He was talking about like the 900 hours and like how like you go from a novice speaker or like language learner to like in the different increments, and it seemed like they went in 900. And also that like you go, or they have the program where they go from 8 to 3, 5 days a week, and get a stipend to learn language.
Oh my God.
I was like, talk about putting value on your language. That's
paying for
awesome.
Right.
Like, that's really awesome.
So the long-term goal is, so Yakutat has a group of people who, it's their job to learn the language, and See Alaska has people that they pay to learn the language. And so these programs do exist, and I think you guys would be candidates for future programs like that, these mentor apprentice programs. And what they're talking about, the other thing that we heard is a mentor apprentice program is not a place for beginners. And that was an interesting statement. And we're talking about the language immersions that we have, like the awesome one we had in Yakutat and the one we had here in Juneau last fall. But then my suggestion was that here in Juneau, we had 2 cabins. There in Yakutat, we had 2 cabins. And I think it's time to say, one of these cabins is for the fluent elders and the advanced learners only. You got to have a certain proficiency to get in the door. And, we want everybody to get to that level. But if you're fairly new to the language, if you're not at least at this sort of high intermediate level, and you're sitting there listening to just Tlingit all day long, it could be just really discouraging and overwhelming. And it could also sort of lead the group to using more simplified Tlingit or English to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. And then in the other house would be the beginners and the lower intermediate students, where we would actually just be doing lessons the whole time. Here's a bunch of stuff that's going to build up the language with you, and here's, we'll have some speakers visit and some other things like that. That, the threat is that it sort of divides us, but I think it also allows, because one of the things that they were talking about here, and that Evan, the Where Are Your Keys guy, talks about is if you've got a limited time frame, you have to make sure your advanced learners are having a chance to get to this master speaker level with your current master speakers so that they can help the others lift up. And there's certainly opportunities to do things all together, eat together and stuff like that. But that might be something we consider. Anything else? Any thoughts? Reactions? Okay. So let's see. Make sure there's no other messages. All right. So let's start our Tlingit tonight, revisiting these concepts of directional relational terms. So once we get to understanding how motion verbs work, we come back to these directional relational terms. We've gone over these, but we'll just keep drilling some of these concepts, going through some of these lists, and then we'll look at how they can relate to motion. And a lot of this is just really just seeing the interconnected pieces, how these different things work. So one of the things is in Tlingit, you really have, the way I see it is you have a base and you have a suffix. A base means it's its own word, and a suffix means it has to attach to a word. Right? So you can't just say day or nach or dach. It has to attach to something. So this is where you get dach, day, and you put those in there as sort of placeholders. Tlingit has lots of placeholders that we're going to see. It just means it or something. But there are times when you want to transition from if you're putting something in there, you don't need the something. Like, it would be very common for me if I were going to say, and from that we get this, and I'd say, we kluk adach awe. And so I would say kluk adach, where you could say kluk dach. Right, so the other thing is learning how to get rid of that placeholder if you don't need it. There might be times where you want to use it. And so in that case you might do that, but you can also just attach these suffixes directly to nouns. And so what nouns in Tlingit, asayi, the name of something, these are things that just sort of exist, and they don't need to belong to anything. Nadak, Hayakajate, douche, cake, gishu. And so these things can just exist on their own. If they get possessed, they get a possessive suffix on them. The bases, though, are a little bit different. So the independent base is this sort of directional term that relates to fixed known points. And Hawaii has these as well. When you're in Hawaii and they're giving you directions to go somewhere, they'll say, upland, to the ocean, towards this town, towards that town. They have other ones, but they don't use them very much, like right, left, north, south. And I think Tlingit is very similar. So you think of Tlingit, and I guess we'll go back to this sort of, this map, looking at this map of Tlingit. Ka'ani aya yata, achwe Kashatina Oti, north, south, east, west, Achwestakat Yah away Chini, dark day, Yestakat at Ayatsat Nach Ha'anikach. So when we go like west on our land, we will always hit the ocean, because this is, Tlingit Ani, it's a fixed point in the Tlingit consciousness. And from there, inland is going east. That's sort of the base structure. And it doesn't mean east and west. but conceptually, that's how they're sort of born. Is our language, we were in the interior, we came to the coast, and our language was really developed and born on the coast for coastal people. And then you have, generally you could say, Naki, which is really up river, and Ichki, which is down river. So these are this is the Tlingit compass, and how you start to talk about directions, going places, some of the things we should be able to do. And I would recommend this, although don't crash, get in the car, somebody gives directions in Tlingit, and the other person drives. And we did this, it was very fun. We almost ran into a couple fences. Don't go fast. Don't make it like the Fast and the Furious in Tlingit, and don't crash, be very safe. But you should be able to do some of this. And this is something we did in Hawaii as well, is when we would go to lunch, he would give us the directions all in Hawaii. And it would include and so in Juneau, you might have, left lane, right lane, middle lane. I don't know if you have 3 or 4 lane roads in Yakutat, but if they develop the superhighway there, then you could do that. So these are some different things to use these directions. Or if you're walking around and guiding someone and doing some different things. There's also a number of different activities we can do when we get to these relational terms. And you might say, Guksa, we gut, and maybe you've got a dime and a chashka or a gucha wherever you are, and you might say gucha kach, chashka kach, chashka tayi, gucha tayi, right? And there's different things you can do, and there are some very primary ones. Kach is going to, or ka is going to be all over the place. And you also notice some of these, they sometimes prefer to have a suffix on them. But these independent ones are born out of this sort of form of Tlingit consciousness, where we are in relation to the entire world. And so they don't need to belong to anything like dak, ichki, naki, daki, dayi. And so you can just say these things. And they can also take on a suffix. So you could say dakde, dakka, dakde, dakka. And so you can say and you can add these different things, and they work. They also sometimes change depending on where you are as a speaker. So inside is different depending on whether you're outside or inside. And sometimes going to the beach is different depending on whether you're outside or inside. So then the second type is a relational base. And a relational base means it has to belong to something. So it's its own word, but it needs to belong to something. So traditionally we'd see these in the dictionary as a da, a gede, a shu. But the way that we're writing them now is with this longer dash instead of the because sometimes that concept is hard for students to let go of, and they would put a da or say a da all the time when you could just, you could say, we hit a da wu good, or you could say, we hit da wu good. So the doesn't need, it gets knocked out by whatever noun would come in there. But if there is no noun, then there should be the there. And this is its. So when we start adding things to relational bases, like how would you say around me?
Da, no. A da, chet.
Like. Any other guesses?
Is it? Khan.
Da. So they get the possessive stuff, and so it works differently because in English you just say around me, right? Around you. But if we wanted to speak English with Tlingit grammar, I'd say my around, your around, our around, hada. This is where hadadushi and hadakuchi comes from. Hada, it's around us, right? And again, so these have to have a noun that they belong to. And that could be, if it's in the case of a person, it could be a pronoun. The other thing, and if it could also be a name. So you could say Jim Da, Jim Gay Day. Right? It's kind of unusual. I don't think Tlingit prefers to do that. It prefers to use the pronouns. And so you would say do da, do gay day. Okay. These also can take a suffix. Right? And then the rule with, generally with the bases, with the relational bases, you just get one. So you wouldn't say, we hit da gay day shoot day. Like you just can't do that, right? And so I don't know, in English, I don't know, you might say the house around against end, right? So it sounds, you've kind of not gotten enough sleep. Maybe you've lost it. And so like grammar is interesting, right? Because messed up grammar could mean you're learning the language. Messed up grammar could mean you're messed up because you drank too much, or it could mean like maybe you're just losing it a little bit. And then the suffix goes on to either one of these, and the suffix can also go on to nouns. The suffix also, there can only be one when we talk about these directional relational suffixes. And they often are related to time. So we learn these suffixes, we learn how these things work, because it allows us to be more dynamic with our language. So you could say, in kachwanik. De'ach in kachwanik. I already told you. If you want to be kind of grumpy about it. Then you could say, I'm going to tell you. So it changes from in to ide. So whenever you have these empty base things, this is the T or the N usually means it's already complete or there or with it. T being with there and N being with it. And then the day means towards it. Right? So conceptually, you have to be able to tie multiple things together. And it's not like a totally awful error, but it's just something to keep track of, right? Some of them will change to the day. And if you just practice studying the verbs and looking at sentences, you should be looking at how these things are functioning. And you should be looking at what they mean in Tlingit, because that's the way gay day, against, right? So I think we touched on this one. And a lot of times gay is actually what it is. The day is a suffix, because this is one that doesn't appear without a suffix. Usually you're going to see it as gate or gay day. And a lot of times it means, it could be like, this is leaning up against this. This is pushed up against this. But a lot of times it could mean we're arguing, like our thoughts are going against each other. And it could mean you made a mistake, because you could say a gate eats a gate. A gate eats a gate would be you have made an error. But it's kind of it could be kind of a big deal. And it could also mean like, there's ways to say like messing around and messing up, and they kind of relate to that. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so we'll look at some lists of these, and so again, we continue to push thinking in Tlingit, because instead of through the door, because Tlingit does not have articles. Hawaiian has kind of an article. And like if you were speaking Hawaiian and you were to say like through the door, that would be fine. But if you said through door, that would mean through a person whose name is door. Or,
It becomes a proper noun.
Yeah. So
If
like
you don't say the.
And there's all kinds of names, like flower is pua. And so if you were to say kapua, that's the flower. But if you just said pua, that means somebody named pua. And so Tlingit is different. So the way that Tlingit works is it doesn't have articles. It has determiners. So you might say through that door, through this door, through that doorway over there, right? So in this case, kahat, nach, which you don't go through the door itself, you go through the doorway. So, but we're just thinking about how English works. On the table, table on, towards the house, house towards, after a while, after, right? So we're just altering the way we think of these things. We go from what we call prepositions to postpositions. They come after. Again, determiners, this, that kind of close to me, where, that over there, you, that way over there. Okay, so let's look at this grabby grab. So this is the speaker. It's close. It's very close to him. Everybody repeat after me. Yas'au.
Yas'au.
He's'au.
He's'au.
We's'au.
We's'au.
Yus'au.
Yus'au.
So this has to do with where these things are located. Oops, I'm gonna mute you guys. Feedback. So they have to do with where they're located in relation specifically to the speaker. And these are used a lot too. And just a reminder, how do these things, no reminder, you guys should know. How do these work in regards to time?
Oh, yeah, it's like right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know about ha. Is that well? I know wa.
Not used.
That's like a little bit ago, right? Or a little bit in the future, or and then you is like a long time from now.
Yeah. So yeah is right now. You is long time from now or long time ago, and we could be kind of end.
Okay.
It usually means the default is kind of that time, but it could be, so and then you'll hear speakers use that. They'll say, we were over there at that time, right? And the other thing that you're going to see with when we get into these suffixes is the more you are looking out for them, the more you'll see them pop up. So one is X apostrophe to reside, but that also means because you could say in the winter, and now you're placing the time in that winter, and you're talking about something. So in winter, we go to hunt mountain goats or whatever we do in that. Okay, so that's how they work. The other ways that they work is when we're talking about big things, big capital letter things like Yaith, the one who cuts off tongues and takes water, and the raven. It's usually Yah or Yu. So those ones are also usually associated with what we would call like proper nouns English. Okay, so again, here's this little visual. Yah, he, we, yu. He is kind of rarely used, but we do see it pop up meaning sort of hither, right? And so you might say, hey, de shunatan wechahat. Hey, de shunatan wechahat. Open the door. So that means you're going to remove the cover by the end towards us, basically. And if it's a door that pushes out, who cares? It's still the same. But then, so you got hey de shunatan, because it's de, the type, it's a motion verb. And this is why you got to always think about what types of verbs are these, because a de motion verb is going to be na. Hey de shunatan. But if I say close the door, eight shutan, with chahat, because eight, it's to completion. It's done. Because you got the T, it's the same, it's a zero conjugation motion verb. Just like you'd say, we de nagu, hagu, neshgu. Okay. There's another one, ha, which is just sort of the vicinity around us, the audience, whoever we are. And so this is where we get hagu and hade, and yake had yigudi. That had is like you've come here to this space that we're all in. So now we get to the suffixes. So this one will appear in any of these three forms. So somebody give me an example of dach. when we would use dach.
Gudachsa yanigut.
Gudachsa yanikut. When would it switch to the TX?
I don't know.
Cha'asa. Cha'asa. Anybody know why it would switch to the TX?
Contraction.
Yeah, I feel like
It is a contraction because there was a vowel,
Yeah.
a vowel before it. So, for example, we dach. Most speakers would say we yanakut. He's coming from right there. He's coming. You yanakut. He's coming from way over there, or she, right? The underline X we typically only see with dach. Off of, from it. And we see this one a lot. Like, for example, there's a bracelet here. Wait, that was kind of, there's a chashka or a gucha here. And you would say, ach sa'in. Or you might say, ach kasa'in. Ach kasa'in we chashka. Lift the cup up off of it. So there are a couple things that happen. Is ach would be up, and because it's going upward, now the conjugation prefix might change to ga, right? Because you're lifting it up. And so we see this in the Raven stories. He pulled his eyes up out of his head. Right? And then, but ach is really the only place you see the underline X. Most commonly you see dach. Occasionally you'll see the TX, but you've got to know this stuff or else you'll be like, well, what is the TX then? But if you can recognize that there's something ending with the vowel and it's causing the dach to contract, that's what's going on. So I'm going to give me a day example. Cha'asa.
Like keen day.
Keen day. I'm going to go to the water. So I'm going to give me a nach.
You have a sentence that.
Yeah.
What was that sentence? I can't remember it. It was like on chagud. Is that?
Anachwagut. I went through it, maybe like it was a rice paper, or anachas like the football team came running through the. But it can also mean along, like you could be pointing at a ridge. Anachwagut. I walked along that ridge, right? Because.
How would you say it with like time? Would that be like a season? Like you went through?
Yeah, so you could say, sometimes you could say, Tauk kanach awa, through the winter. And so kanach works better for that, which is sort of over and along. And when they combine, they function different. That's why we got to always keep talking about them. Because day could also be towards that time. So you could say, Tauk day, towards when it was getting to be towards winter, or tauk dach, from winter, or from that time, if you're telling a story.
Oh, you could say like yidadi de.
Yeah, so you
Up
say
until this
yidati
time.
day, up until this time, up until this time, we've been trying to figure out how these things work, right? And also you could say, like if I'm telling some story, and you say, Hajitas awati. Ha'in has ashtu. Ade akawud akad. Ade kaduwud akuya. Seed. So like they taught us how to make these narrow dugout canoes. Dach away, on away, with soon. And since that time, we've been hunting with them. Right? So these are how you place things in time. And we got to learn how to do this because it's how we tell stories, it's how we connect things. When we're listening to speakers, and it helps us, because we were talking about this today, moving from being beginning and intermediate speakers to advanced means we're able to do complex things with time, right? For example, we were talking about this in Yucatan. You might say, "Dugyaku awa akawat aka away kat kach away ka." So his boat wrecked, and then he was on this island, this guy. He was there for 2 months. But what happens with that narrative is you say 2 months later, whereas you might also say for 2 months, in 2 months, he was looking for food. So, or no, let me say it again. And that's the better way. So 2 months passed. You could also say uwache. That's for days or seasons or months to pass. Shuwachich also works. Shuwachich means it ran to its end, it came to an end. But then if you say dech diskanach, something, so then you're saying for 2 months of time, or over 2 months, he was looking for food and his life was hard. Someone give me an example.
Nadog cut wegucha.
Nadauk kat wegucha. So it is on the table, but it is sort of, it often implies that like it has arrived there, there was something, it hasn't always been there perhaps. And so this one pops up a lot with verbs that have come to a completion as well, because it's sort of marked like arriving at something. And so sometimes these suffixes, they work as far as place, logic, and time. Okay. W or I
I'm trying to think of something now, and I just can't think of anything. That's not.
Gusu.
Oh, there you go.
Right, so there's one. Neshu.
Uh,
Right, so it pops on at the end. And one of these things is when we get some of these, the rule should be, if that's the suffix we hear in the question, that's the suffix we use in the answer. Right, so the same thing. Let's say you're a parent, your kid comes home 2 hours late, he's a teenager. You say, "Where did you come from?" And the kid says, "I'm going to bed," right? So you need the logic to match. I am coming from Auntie's house. You can call her, right? So the same thing. Gudachsayanikut. Hundakehiti dachyanchakut. Gudesayanikut. Nesteyanchakut. Gunachsa. Ach tatnach. Shibushi tunach. Gutsa. Iyagut. What I want to. Let's go. Hundakehitit. Chakut. Gusuwa. Neshuchat. So the other thing is with this one, with the or the w, that is used with non-verbal phrases. Neshuchat. I am at home. Neshuhu. Yaduhu. Yaduchat. Yadu wa'eh. Wadu wa'eh. Keshyat hu. right? So these are the ways that these things are working, and we keep in mind the complexities and the dynamics of all of them. An example of that?
Juno.
Juno. I live in Juno. It's residing or at a place, kind of at rest, or in that particular time. So you might say 1999. Party play includes a T, right? And then in the cases where it changes to the zero would be if it's which can be the default. Like you might say, Shkagwe aya ha'ani, akhish kohas ani, aye khatbuti in 1999. And so there's examples of using these two different types of suffix in the same sentence. So what you've done here is you've established what this place is. We're talking about Skagway, and then you can say, I was living there. Ye khatbutiyan. We usually wouldn't do that unless it's already been established, right? This one.
Kagwantan Khutsiti.
There's a good example of a different suffix. It
Okay.
sounds exactly the same.
Oh.
And what's fun is in linguistics, I would call one a locative, which you just used, and I would call this one locative.
Oh.
And what's fun is that those two words are spelled exactly the same. I'm not sure if they're different words. I think they're different words. I always want to have a final and say, what is this? And there'd be two underlined X's, and they'd say locative and locative, and those words are spelled exactly the same. And then everybody would always be wrong. So
You'd always be right.
okay, fine. Okay.
If your kid was really sassy, then they could use that. Like, I'm always at Auntie's house.
Right. And so this one means to be moving around at a place. So you say Nich Yenakut Yesh. He's going all over on the beach. So it could be somewhat of a kind of random pattern, or to keep coming back somewhere, right? So you could say he keeps coming back to the beach. And you can see this as well. So sometimes when you have a repetitive verb, you might have ha-e-de, future form of a verb, ha-eat, perfective form of a verb, ha-ich, repetitive form of the verb, right? So we see how this works with the empty base, which we'll talk about as well. Everybody okay? Questions? Okay, we'll do a little bit more and we'll take a short break because we started late. So this is how they start to combine. So we've got ya. Everybody say ya.
Yeah.
Ya.
Yeah.
Yadach.
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 Yat.
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 Yate.
Yade.
Yate.
Yade.
Yanach.
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 Yat.
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 Yadu.
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 Yag.
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 Yach.
Yag.
Yach.
Yag.
So the front part will change between ya, he, we, and you. But the patterns will be the same. So heidach, heit, heide, heinach, heit, heidu, heich, heich. Same. Weidach, weidach, weide, weinach, wait, weidu, weich, weich. So we pay attention to what's going on with the tone as well. Yudach, yudch, yude, yunach, yut, You do. You. So as far as how we start putting these together, gudachsa, gudesa, gunachsa, gutsa, gusu, guchsa, guchsa. So it depends. So as you're asking these, not only are you asking where, but you're putting some additional type of motion on there. From, towards, through, arrived at, where generally, residing, and sort of moving along or repeatedly going somewhere. So we might say, Gudachsaweyi yagu. Hunadachayaha yagu. So this is the way people used to greet each other on the shore. Gudesahyanikut. Hundakehitideyanchakut. Gunachsaak akawahu. Wait, yanachakawahu. And these are kind of strange sentences in some cases. Gut sa'uwakuch. Nicht uwakuch. Gusu akisi. Yadu ikisi. So again, gusu should be yadu, and then the response should be yours, right? Guch sayeti ish. Deshuch yeti ish. So same thing. Guch gets a deshuch, and it could be any place name or it could be Washington D.C. Yeyati, Obama, right? And then results in Guchsa shkanel techch. Yuch shkanel techch. So he's just repeatedly, or she, biking along. So here's the other one. We've done ha. So we've got ha-de, which is sometimes han-de. Same thing. Yike hat-yigudi. Okay. So a relational term to see how these work is G, which is not, it's related to hand, but it doesn't mean hand, it means possession, right? And so these are the things G-wu. So we see that a lot. So when we see this long hyphen before, we know there needs to be something before, right? And so there are other body parts that you could use, for example. Right, so we'll do these, and then we'll talk about a different body parts. So we'll say, I guess you guys can repeat after me. Ach ji dach.
Ach ji dach.
Ach ji de.
Ach ji de.
Ach ji nach.
Ach ji nach.
Ach jid.
Ach jid.
Ach ji wu.
Ach ji wu.
Ach ji.
Ach ji.
Ach ji.
Ach ji.
And you're going to need to know these ones for giving and taking and receiving, right? So you could say, Ejidekakwati, Donna, I'm going to give you some money. Or I could say, Ejidakakwaset, I'm going to rip that out of your hand. Or I could say, Hajitas awati hakusti, they gave us our culture. I could say, Dechtana, Dichtana achjiwu, Hechtana achji. So we see whenever we have jiwu, if it goes negative, it should be G, because the wu means it's there. Same thing, we'll see this, we'll say, Yaduhu, here he is. Or someone says, Gusu chone, it's class time. Someone might say, Tesh yatu, he's not here. So yadu changes to yat. So another way we can see how these work is we could say, Duche, Uk, duche. That's the way click kanach.
Mouth.
Duche dach.
Dach.
Click kanach, that's the way.
Their words.
Yeah, so it could be they said it, or it could be Duche dach dach usus tu et chai. Her food fell out of her mouth, right? Or, but chedach, because you could say For example, if you got a new name, you I was named, it's another way to say that was who I was named. Or you could see, this is how I heard it from Robert Zuboff. Okay. Duchede.
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 Das so wirklich kachinach.
Like, would that be like they said it? No.
Duchede. Duch,
Like
from their mouth.
Oh. So like they spit something out, maybe?
Well, what is day?
Toward.
Towards.
Oh, so.
Towards their mouth,
Yeah.
right? So we hear this one in Ku'ir,
Oh,
when they call somebody's name, and they'll say their name, Chede, and you're feeding the spirit of that person, the spirit dish. But it can also be, give this food to your baby, put it to their mouth, right? So usually, and then the other, well, we'll get to that. Ducheinach.
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 That's a way to kachinach. Ducheinach.
Well, through their mouth.
Through their mouth, right? And so there could be some weird instance like a spear went through their mouth or something.
Would it be like if you got a piercing, like a labret piercing? Would that be?
I don't know if that might be through their skin. I'd have to ask.
Is there a
But-
verb to pierce? There's a verb to pierce.
Yeah.
Not like
Yeah.
like a piercing pierce, right?
Yeah, like
It's like like
tuck, like
to pierce
you would
someone's
probably
lip.
say "Duchada'a tunachaya awutak." They poked through their lips because is very specific to the mouth. Like I don't know if you pierced your whole mouth all the way through both sides of your cheeks, maybe. I don't know if people are doing that yet. I wouldn't be surprised. But chenach, as far as Tlingit goes, when you hear that, the logic in Tlingit means through the mouth of. And that's why we say Tlingit chenach, through the mouth of Tlingit, Tlingit chenach. And so it usually has to do with language because that's what goes through a person's mouth. I mean, it could be, I guess, if he's breathing through his mouth, which I don't know. Maybe you're talking about when someone's sleeping. Duchait. Duchait. Das a weklet kachinach.
That's like their words or something they
So-
said.
This one, the mouth is so interesting with these because chedach and chenach usually have to do with words. Chedei usually has to do with feeding. Chet also, because the way that I've heard this one is so we know as far as when we do handling verbs are interesting because they're handling verbs, but they're also motion verbs, right? So that's why you say achjit te. Zero conjugation because of the T suffix. But you can also say, achit sa'in hin.
Oh.
Bring water to my, and it doesn't mean like bring the cup right, but that's sometimes how elders will say, bring me some water because I'm gonna drink, put it to my mouth. It's a very nice thing to say. Duchewu. Duchewu. So we see the open suffix will always be the opposite of what's before it. Yadu, jiwu, chewu. That's the way like kachinach duchewu. Achtichi, we kate chewu.
Oh.
It's like
Gusto
They're
achtichi. Ha, achtichi a way to kate chewu.
Oh,
It's like
okay.
they're
In the
holding
mouth.
It is
Yeah.
located in the
Yeah.
mouth.
Like physically
Yeah.
located. In the
Right.
mouth,
And so it would be it'd be a pretty unusual thing. But if the dog, it would be the way to say the dog has it in his mouth.
Mhm.
Right. And I saw these little drawings they did a long time ago with this little dog doing things. You could say duch, but I have never heard it. Duch. You could say that as well. And you might say like he wiped his mouth because he wipes all over on his mouth, right? Not just
one part.
It wasn't just one wipe. His mouth was filthy. Okay. Let's take 5. Some water, do whatever, and then just 5 minutes because we gotta rush through some of this stuff.
Are these any of them phone numbers?
Jeez.
Upstairs.
Oh, food. Oh, me too. That's just sugar.
Who cares? It's food. Are we recording?
Mm-hmm. One away.
You didn't
Oh, you're
say.
after. I did. The little meeting still going on or whatever.
Oh,
Wait,
I wanted
no,
to go
you
to
didn't
that,
go
but
Rockwell?
not worth it.
I'll tell you after.
Oh, where did the shoe team go? She was just sitting in there.
I saw her like leaving.
Okay.
I don't know.
These are so good. This is like
It needs more lemon. There's way too much crust proportionately. It's
I
terrible.
don't think it's much. I don't think it's that bad.
David's like, I'm hungry. Whatever.
I'm like so hungry. I had
What?
half a burrito left from lunch. They don't have any silverware to eat it with.
Oh, it
So I
ate with
get
my hands.
home.
I've been like, whatever.
It's a taqueria. It's like the big burrito. You know, like it's like that big. It's like it's probably like bigger than this cup.
Oh,
Are they still open?
no,
No.
I just went.
What
And then
size
I-
is that? 20?
I also forgot my whale guard, so I couldn't get in the language lab to warm it up. Just wanted hot tea. Again.
cardiac people.
Hmm?
Cardiac people. You watch the Google. Hey.
Hey. Oh, you got one more minute.
Guess what?
1 more minute to save the world.
Question HK away.
Oh,
Just das wish I did God.
huh.
Just
The katas is too different.
Mhm.
they're still meeting with these HR people now.
Oh, really?
It's still going on. They just left. It's just kind of,
Do they have the Lions there? No.
it's just Southeast people.
Okay.
But it was just like,
That was that meeting that she was talking about.
It kind of joke at them.
Yeah.
Okay. The Shua team might come back. to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
and I saw her.
Oh, definitely good. Whatever.
Whatever.
Okay. So, back to these combinations. So these different ways. I had on the class that we talked about some other things, but I think we'll just stick with this stuff. So, continuing to think about these.
Do you still want me to give a presentation tonight?
Oh, didn't you say you were tired?
Kind of. I was going to talk about the summit.
Okay.
That's after, or
You gonna do that?
okay.
Okay.
Ja, jag wish kan jag skjuta det adi jag i. Jag tror vad jag tror vad jag wish kan jag skjuta det adi det. Degina. Have idee. Dag nach. Koal Chatuku. Have dag. Hade Haswell Gawish Kanach to the ideas. Kunach book a ya. Dag nach. Koal Chatuku. Have dag. Kadane Hasawsku. Kadane Hasawsaku. Language revitalization of dot. Kwas net Jinkadinach. Alaskans.
Yeah. Question cut Hanusk na
No.
Alaska. Anaski.
Anaski. Hade Hasbuk Ja Tlingit Anikach. Ja wish kan ik the ideas. Alaska Heritage Walter Sokolov Building. Yay. AWT. Language revitalization, a dot. Yay. How tutliat. Yeah, okay.
Wushu Khautukla.
Wish you how tutliat.
Wushu Khaututlia.
You wish you how tutliat.
Wushu Khaututli Atk.
Wish you how tutliat. Yayaki. Konachuk a Yehuji. Kriya ya wish kana khotu diadi adat ya tundatani tundatani action kukhsati ikhoti kriya ya yeah.
Sheesh. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, yaki. Kanachawe. Adata khotank. As the kakhta khotank owe. As the yuchatanki. Shitiheni ah. Kanachawe has awe at do such. Ego genki ah. As the yuchatangi. Yuchatla atki. Ya tsutkan. Deki na awe uhan. Okay, atsu ya. Utusuku has to shkuni away. A cow gun. A joy dana aya has to jide utu. It's the cut Alaska kadach. Like 1,000 kedushin kat kadech ahadan. Has to jita wati. Khanach has to tu yake. Yeah, adat away tuchutang tsu. Gwash chinkat talk kanach has june. The cut at ach kaw the gun. A joy has the two in gwash two hasa for ach has to you katangi tin. Kanach away okay. Yeah, mohak kahavai. Achtosugu kain utushtin. Datiach soe has to you has to yejini. How you tangi down. The kanach yake with strategies. Yeah, away yak akayak. Has our satin has what to satini that. What uhan ko'a hashuka ayi what to satini so tashli that what 2030 equity jayik chishuku o what uhan singit yakanach was a good to yastikat Alaska kanach ayanach aya ya kuninach so way adutsa Hayukatanki awas aus cool. Ya Kanacho ha a dekki. Hayetki. Okay, Johan, you have to us a good yes the cutway language demonstrations tin. Yet just whoosh you a gachtutla art. You to us a good Cash ulti aware how you hatangi play a dot aya wush you hatutla atki. Ya dasa hakashitsini at a dot. Yewe was a way how you hatangi dot, kunach away a dot you hatutla at a way kunach a teach to create you hatangi. Cheese. But Jadasa it was a good a dot. Yukapitan Ayati, Gwash Thursday, Gwash next Tuesday. Whenever you feel ready, we'll just have a short conversation. And I'm not worried about how long it is, but I just want it to be something that's happening right now. So you just say something about something that's happening right now to the best of your ability. And we'll do it Thursday and Tuesday and next Thursday. Whenever you feel ready. So just like that. You just say what you can about something. It could be anything. And then we'll just talk about it for a little bit. Okay? Sheesh. Hey, we lost everybody online.
Oh no.
So now it's switched up. I don't know what happened. They all fell out. I'll assume that everybody's in the universe is going to watch this. So we'll wrap up our class by looking. So we went through these base suffix combinations, and so now we start to look at. The goal here is to see how they change and how they sort of function. So example, we have with the low tone, which is it's a possessive pronoun. With a high tone is it, or that place, or that time, or the reason, or the fact. It just depends. So usually it's just referring to it is the best way to think of it, I think. And then just like we go from chat to when we got high tone in a pronoun, we know it's an independent pronoun. All the others have low tone. They're all non-high tone. So now we got these. When there's the dash, that means it needs to belong to a noun, or there's that comes right before it. So we could say gukaka, sikka, kwatka, ishaka, and then same with ya and tu. These are probably the three most common ones. On or the horizontal surface of, or inside some kind of very shallow thing. Although a lot of times in a vessel, like if you're talking about a boat or a car, a lot of people will say yik. Even though like a car, you get in and close the door, it's still, we're boat people. We've been boat people for thousands of years. You can't just make us car people overnight. And same thing, like ka, very similar to English. We are looking at a screen right now. Maybe something is inside that screen technically, but we don't say, hey, what's in TV tonight? Right? You say, what's on TV? Even though on, it's sort of a flat surface. So in English, on, I guess on can kind of work like that. Like there's a fly on the wall.
Spider on the wall.
Is it a spider on the wall?
Would it be ka or ya?
It's ka. And we thought, and we talked about with elders, we're like, wouldn't it be kind of tu? Because you're looking, almost like you're looking through a window. And they said, yeah, that sounds good. And then when they gave us another sample sentence, they went right back to ka. So it's ka for something to be on a TV or screen. You would say ka. Ya is the face or the vertical surface of. Tu is inside of. And this, it could be, it's a closed container or some abstract thing. Right? It's inside of you, it's inside of these things. And then when you talk about like our language and stuff, some of these other concepts, it often goes to tin or teen or een, which is with, instead of using these. But they start to, what they really talk about, the independent bases talk about how things relate to this known Tlingit world. The relational bases are how two different objects or things relate to each other. And then the suffixes are talking about what type of relationship that kind of is, right? So those are the sort of three big concepts that we're looking at in this particular chapter. And so in order to get this chapter, you can read the chapter a little bit more. It has more description, and then go back into the stories and just keep looking for examples. And here's some examples here. Adayutuchwatan. I thought about it. So there's Adam. And you could say, Ida yutuchwatan. I thought about you, right? Or you could say, Hastu da yutuchwatan. Hastu yuchatangi da yutuchwatan. We hit da yutuchwatan. And so anything could go there and then followed by da. But again, once you put a noun in, you should practice knocking the out of there, right? So there might be other cases where you're really trying to emphasize the subject. When math away, I was really thinking about math.
Take.
Wooch yachdu tu. Maybe it was yayati. So this is in this case there. And again, we said when you're using in this case, you should already have referenced it, or you should reference it very soon. A cut is say you forgot it. Cut is say woke up. You forgot about me, right? Cut say woke up. I forgot about you. Akudziti, he or she was born there. So here's a couple other relational suffixes, and this kind of rounds out your relational suffixes. The CH can do one of two things. It can mark who is the subject of the verb. The other thing that it can do is it can mark somebody is doing something with that particular thing. So you might say, Achtlach, Shawachich. My mom, Achtlach Shawachich we kutzin. My mom clubbed a rat. Achtla awe hitach. Achtla, or maybe you'd say hitach. Achtla shawachich we kutzin. With this broom or with a broom, my mom clubbed this rat. So when we get ach at, that is the CH. And there's a very, well, we won't go. Qa, which is to be in the area of, or going after, or waiting for. And usually you're going to get going after or waiting for. And a lot of times we'll hear this one is aqa'awa, or you might say kahwe qawugu. He went to go get coffee, but he went after it. So those are the ways we sort of use that one. Qa. And then N is with, most often with. Or you could say on. And on is very similar to ach if you're using it like he paddled with this particular paddle that I'm holding here. Ya acha awa on awacha with ka. Right? That man paddled with this very paddle here. And so what we pay attention with here is we've got this one. It is a short and high vowel, and we look at how it changes when we start adding suffixes on there. And there's some patterns here, but we just got to see them so we can get used to them, because sometimes it's going to go long and low. So from we get, repeat after me, ach,
Which
qa, dach, ach, de,
day
on,
on
anach, at, abu,
abu
ach, ach. And the endings for the suffixes, for day especially, it can be short or long. It doesn't matter. And so this one, there's certain combinations that just, they don't work, so they don't exist. You can't have that. Kadach, kach, kade, kanach, kanach, kat, kabu, kach, kach, yadach, yach, yade, yanach, yet, yabu, yach, yach, tuqa, tudach, tudch, today, tunach, toot, tuwu, tuch. Okay, so again, we talked about this. If we have certain suffixes, they would, especially the w, it means to be located somewhere. The best translation is probably is, are, at. And so if it's not there, if it goes negative, that suffix must fall off. So you shouldn't say Kastana achji wu. Kastana achji. Right? And so this is how we see that it's this particular suffix. So we go achji wu.
Achji.
Kesh achji.
Kesh achji.
Yadu.
Yad.
Keshyat.
Keshyat.
Wadu.
Wadu.
Keshwait.
Keshwait.
Nesu.
Nesu.
Keshnes.
Keshnes.
Awu.
Awu.
Kesha.
Kesha.
Duyawu.
Yawu.
Keshduya.
Keshduya.
Okay, so here's a whole bunch. We'll run through this list and then we'll be done. We'll see how far we can get. And so we'll just repeat these once, but these are things that you should be going over, consulting these lists, looking for these lists as you go through and see different speeches and stories. How are they using this? The parentheses means that part is optional, but we'll just go and use it with the parentheses. The key,
Kiki.
the kina,
The kina.
the kinde,
The kinde.
the ye,
The ye.
the yina,
The yina.
the yinde,
The yinde.
na ki,
Na ki.
ich ki,
Ki.
ich,
I.
dak,
Da.
dakka,
Dakka.
echka,
Echka.
ik,
Ik.
dak,
Dog.
de ki,
De ki.
yan,
Yan.
de ya,
De ya.
kliya,
Kliya.
nes,
Nees.
gan,
Gone.
kuch,
Kuch.
kuch,
Kuch.
kekde,
Kekde.
shinach,
Shinach.
atnach.
Atnach.
Okay, so now here's so now we get and these are kind of broken into lists, and sometimes there's one list and two lists, and the idea is these are the most common ones. So now these ones are relational bases, and so we can add any noun, or we would have there, but we'll just say the word itself. Da,
Da.
da ka,
Da. Ka.
ite,
Ite.
ge,
Ge.
it,
It.
kinak,
Kinak.
ke,
Ke.
sh,
Sh.
na,
Na.
na,
Na.
nya.
Ya.
So this used to be the gamma right there. It's fallen out, but this is why sometimes you'll have, so you have sanya and henya, nanya, and those all contain that in that direction. Sha,
Sha.
shaki,
Shaki.
sh,
Sh.
shuka,
Shuka.
tak,
Talk.
tayi,
Tayi.
tuk,
Tuk.
ak,
Talk.
ak,
Ak.
a,
A.
ek,
Take.
eka,
Eka.
one,
One.
wakshiyi.
Wakshi.
So we see that wak and Tlingit compounding. When you make compound words, everything except the last one tends to go short and low. What?
What?
Khan,
Khan.
khan,
Khan.
khu,
Who.
ak,
Kak.
eh,
Kak.
usyi.
Pussy.
Yes.
Yes.
And so yes is usually for the benefit of, like, to do something for someone or give something to someone. So it's that's how that works. All right. Any questions, thoughts, ideas?
Do you think it's possible to make like a Connect 4 game with like Tlingit, like these type of things on it, and like different versions of it for whatever you're working on? Except for it wouldn't be Connect 4 anymore. It'd be like just Connect.
Oh,
Just connect.
well,
This is in general.
It's a good idea because you could make a bunch of cards that were blue, and they would have all these relational bases on them.
Mhm.
And then you could have these cards that are red, and they could have suffixes on them. And then you could have a bunch of nouns and you could just practice putting them there and then pick a verb. And so you can have all these verbs that are already, say, in perfected form. So you don't have to mess with the verb yet, but then you could say, hit da de boo boo. So he was walking around the house. And then you could say, hit ta yi de woo goo, or whatever it was. And so you could do something like that. So you're playing some mix and match. And part of the game would be, we would have a whole big list of them. And then I would lay down 3 cards, or I don't know how we could play.
If you did like Legos.
Legos could be,
Legos
it could be really fun, because you could do Lego Tlingit learning, because it blocks together, block. And it's not as straightforward, I think, because it was looking like, and I don't know that much about Mohawk, I don't know that much about Inupiaq, but you're saying it seems to be like this part plus this part, and you just you can throw them together, and the languages are complicated. They're all complicated. Where Tlingit gets especially complicated is they start changing each other as they interact. But some of those things would help. So you had these list of suffixes, and you could practice. And it could be like you lay down a card, and then I can only lay down a card if I got a base to lay down on it, and then you'd have to lay down a suffix, and then the next person there got to translate. And so that would be a good sort of practice. And so the one thing we do have to figure out is how do we get more activities and things, because I'm good at making lists and telling you what those lists are, but then somebody else has to go make fun things to do, because I don't mess around with making fun things. Not my business. Okay.
No fun in this classroom.
Light. House to do. Good job. Right. Bye, everybody who is watching this. Cheesh.